Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Guess what I finally got? This guy. That's right, I'm finally going to take a look at the Kylo Ren 6-scale figure by Hot Toys from Star Wars The Last Jedi. And we're off. Okay, anybody who's watched any of my videos in which I review a 6-scale figure by Hot Toys or Sideshow knows the drill here. You can expect a typical format. It's standard. That's how it's meant to be. It's by design. And on the cover, for Hot Toys especially, you just get some very fine photography of the figure itself. Also a little bit of a chromium thing going on with the Star Wars logo and a few other aspects right here. There's an interesting concept. Kylo Ren sitting, kneeling, with his sword pointed down. I guess that's something Kylo Ren would do if he wanted to melt a hole through the hull. This fades into the sides of the box, which have a sort of symmetrical black and gray thing going on there at angles. Anyway, but enough about the packaging. Let's crack this bad boy open and see what he has to offer. There we have it again. Kylo Ren, kneeling, poking a hole through the floor. I guess there's more than one way to kill a Snoke. Spoiler alert, sorry. Nice little bit of cross-promotional play going on with the Praetorian Guards. Again, with this crazy light-up feature going on with his unstable lightsaber. Yeah, okay, I guess that's pretty cool. I have got a different way of doing that, and I'll show it to you guys later. It kind of resembles more of a flaming sword. Anyway, here we are, into the guts of the thing. Let's rip off this clamshell and see what they have to offer. Obviously, this isn't the first time that I've had this box open. As you can see, I've removed all the plastic bits from the arms and such to protect it from scratches, fading, what have you. Now, the nice thing about this one over the last offering is that in addition to this helmet, which is amazing, and it comes in two pieces, that neck pops off, just like this, and that will enable you to have him hold the helmet, or cradle it under his arm, or what have you. Returning the helmet to its principal purpose of being displayed on the figure's body is a simple matter of popping it back on the neck, and inserting the neck into the corresponding joint. Now, this lightsaber, the blades, as you can see, they pop right off, so you can use the hilt, hang it from his belt, do whatever you wish. And look at this. This little wrap here that I haven't removed, I'm guessing that's Hot Toys telling us to expect bleeding. That fabric is going to bleed onto the plastic of that neck and leave an unsightly mark. You can expect it. Underneath the figure, you can see there's a nice display base with some custom graphics that you can either use or not use depending on your preference. I recommend only using them if you never plan to sell the figure. I've found that more than once on mine they have scratched, and that of course will kind of decrease the value of the figure depending on who you're selling to. Anyway, nice array of hands. Look at that, we've got batteries. You can put them in this interchangeable arm if you want, but I'm not a fan of doing that. You won't see me doing that in this video or ever if I have my way. Now, the cape. It comes without wires. We're going to fix that right now, and I'm going to show you how. What we're looking at here is a spool of 20 gauge galvanized steel wire, and I'm going to show you how to use that with this cape in order to achieve more dynamic effects with it. It looks great just letting it drape and hang down if you pleat it properly, if you work with a little bit. But for those who want to go the extra mile, this is going to be something that you're going to want to try, trust me. Now, fortunately, because of the way that this cape is constructed, it's a very easy task to perform. It's going to be hard to tell because of the lighting and just because of the nature of the fabric of the cape itself. But this thing actually has in that seam a large enough opening all the way up to the midpoint of the back of the neck of the cape that you could run a length of this wire all the way up there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a quick test of the length of that cape just to see roughly how much of this wire I'm going to need. You see that I'm running it down the entire length of the cape there. Once I have a clear idea of how long it needs to be, take these snips, cut it. It's very easy to cut. These are just sprue cutters basically that I use when I'm doing model kits. And then once you get that cut, just go ahead and find the hole at the bottom of the cape where you can just run that wire up. Now, before attempting this, a note of caution. You can see that I'm testing the edges of that wire. That's because I want to make sure that they're not so ridiculously sharp that they're going to wind up poking right through the fabric of the cape. Now, in the interest of time, I'm choosing to err on the side of, well, what's the opposite of caution? Recklessness. That's right. That's one of my favorite words. So I'm going to just be really careful running this thing up the length of the cape. Now, you might want to find like a steel file or something to round out that wire so that it doesn't poke through. Another option would be to, say, use some gaffer tape or some duct tape or electrical tape even to apply to the tips of those things just really tightly so that the edges don't poke through the fabric. Now, you see what I'm doing there. I'm just kind of grabbing the cape itself right there at the seam and pushing the wire up and then pulling the length of fabric down along the wire until it gets all the way up. See? All the way up in there. Easy peasy, mac and cheesy. Just to give you all fair notice, you are going to run into issues where the wire starts to poke out the bottom of the cape. Don't let that discourage you. If that happens, just be patient and push it back in. Or maybe you can devise some means of actually creating a plug, something that you can shove up in there under the wire that will keep it from falling back out or protruding. Right now I'm checking the joints of the figure. You can see there's quite a bit of range of motion in both the knees and in the elbows. They're double jointed, and there's not a lot of restriction insofar as the fabric of the costume is concerned. So this thing moves pretty freely. That being said, one of the issues that you're going to run into that you'll see is that the boots aren't nearly as flexible as they were in the Force Awakens offering of Kylo Ren from Hot Toys. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to have to limit this pose to something a bit more museum-esque. And we'll have to rely on the now wired cape to provide any sort of dynamics to the pose. That's not to say that I'm not going to have Kylo wielding his lightsaber. Of course I'm going to have him wield his lightsaber. I'm not a crazy person. To that end, you can see that I've just inserted the saber-wielding right hand into his right arm. Now, my original thought was to have him doing sort of a force push. You can see that I have the force push hand sitting right there on the table. I've not really played with this one recently, so I just kind of want to get a look at it and see what it's capable of. Just switching out the pegs on the hands because they're in there pretty tight, so I had to use my teeth. So, you know, if you buy this figure off of me, just fair warning, it's got my DNA on the wrist pegs. Sliding that into the hand. Now, you might run into an issue on the right hand, by the way, with his zipper on the sleeve coming up. So just be diligent and watch that because nobody likes to see that. A note on personal preference. When I'm putting Kylo's lightsaber into his hand, I try not to get the hand terribly close to the crossguard. The reason for that is because of that discharge that comes out the side. Personally, if I were wielding that sort of a lightsaber, there's no way in hell you catch my hands anywhere close to that. I don't know, maybe he's got some gloves that will protect him from that. Who knows? But I just feel like it makes more sense. Now, what we're running into here is there's a multitude of issues working together to develop into something that I just don't like. We're running into a lack of articulation in the ankles, and the whole notion of a neck and head being one piece is something that I understand the appeal of. You get rid of that break between the head and the neck that takes away from the realism of the thing, but you do lose a significant amount of performance from the figure itself. You're stuck with the head basically locked in one position in relationship to the neck. You can't jut the head out there. You can't draw it back. You can't move it to the side. I demonstrate for you right now, but unfortunately I can't because Kylo's head is one piece along with his neck. The other concern I have here has to do with the costume itself and downscaling. Most of the photos that I saw of the Kylo Ren figure, the solicitation photos that they showed when they were selling the figure, they featured Kylo wearing the cape. My concern when I saw those was that the body itself was going to have to be significantly too slim in order to compensate for the thickness of the cape, and so it wouldn't look bulky when he was wearing it. As it turns out, it really wasn't much of an issue. However, this is a bit slim compared to what Adam Driver's build was like in that film. The end result of it is that the figure looks great when he's posed with the arms at his side. But as soon as you start to get the least bit dynamic, raising the arms up, spreading the legs wider in order to suggest more action, those thin limbs and that thin torso, they become exaggerated. Yeah, to the point that I just don't feel like it looks all that attractive. To that end, you'll notice that I've switched the hand again. I've gotten rid of the force push hand, and now I've replaced it with just the relaxed grip, and there's a purpose for that. I'm just going to use that hand to interact with the edge of the cape when I finally get it put on. Now, if I rotate the figure's body around, which I don't think I'm going to do here, you can see that it's actually not at all unattractive. Now here I am just testing the limits of wielding that sword hand and seeing how far it will bend, just to see just to give myself some sort of an idea of what this figure will look like. Now, maybe, yeah, you can see from this angle, it just doesn't look too bad at all. I mean, look, the arms look fine. They're a nice thickness. Everything looks really good. It's just when you break them free from the body in the slightest bit, they just become gangly looking. So try not to do that. If you want to pose him with the cloak off, do so, but don't go crazy. Now, the fundamentals of cape posing, which is just about all that I know. Capes are traditionally my kryptonite. I used to say that all the time back in the day, and they continue to be so now. I just don't have a lot of practice with them. But I know a thing or two, and one of the things that I do know is that you want to keep as much of the cape as possible conforming as closely as you can to the body. That's probably why this cape reads so well when it doesn't have the wires in it. That's probably why Hot Toys made the decision not to put wires into it. Because when you introduce wires into the equation of a cape, you run the risk of having it hover a little bit too much if you're not terribly diligent with the actual posing of the cape itself. You'll actually see at the end of this pose, I guarantee that you'll notice that there are some parts of it that appear to be floating, that don't fall naturally. That's the kind of thing that I can correct over time. When I get done with any pose, I set it on a shelf and then it sits there for days, and as I walk by it, I'll notice something and I'll tweak it. It takes a long, long time for me to dial a pose in to the extent that I want it to be dialed. These videos, I'm doing them in a hurry. I'm trying to get things done as quickly as I can, and it's basically just a starting point. But anyway, we were talking about capes. There are a few things that you need to take into account when you're considering cape motion, and the primary one is what's causing that motion. Is the cape moving because of the wind? Or is the cape moving because of some action taken by the character? Or is the cape moving because of both of those things combined? When it comes to figure posing, that question is going to be answered by what sort of pose you have your character in. Now, as you can tell here, I have Kylo in a bit of a museum pose. He's very static. There's not going to be a hint of movement coming from the lower part of his body, his legs, nothing. He's going to be standing there stock still, stoic, almost statuesque, like literally, like if you were going to commission a statue of Kylo Ren in the sense of Kylo Ren, hero of the First Order, that's kind of where my head's at right now when I'm striking this pose. So that leaves our answer with wind, and when it comes to this pose in particular. That's what's causing the cape movement here. Now, once you've answered that question, and the answer to that question is wind is moving the cape, then you have to decide how much wind is there. Also, you have to take into account the thickness, the weight of the cape. Wow, just so many things you have to take into account. Now, you don't want it to go too strong because then it looks like he's standing in the middle of a hurricane. And why would any sane person be doing that? So I find that subtle is better. Also, this is another trick here that I'm going to show you. Take another length of wire, similar in length to that which we used to line the cape with. When you have that, fold it in half and then fold down the ends. Now you can see that I've taken my own advice from earlier in the video and I've applied some gaffer tape to the tips of those wires to prevent any damage to be, incurred by the costume. Now, let's flip up his skirt and take a look at what's underneath, and what we're seeing there is his belt. Take those ends that you bent down and slide those ends down into that belt. They'll hook nicely, and once that gets done, and I'm having a hell of a time with this one right here for whatever reason. Sometimes you just need to like pull back on that belt a little bit to get it to go in. Once you get this done though, what this will do is provide an additional armature for the middle part of the cape to hang on to. It gives it just that little bit of lift so that it's not just the edges of the cape that are floating up. Another way of achieving this obviously would be to find a way to have another armature wire running along the bottom of the cape. That's not always desirable, and it's almost never possible. It's not very often that you find a seam or hem rather, at the bottom of the cape that you can use to do that. You certainly don't have one in this one, so that's why I'm opting to go with this belt-based armature system. Now, again, what we've got here is clearly there's a little bit of wind going. Not a lot of wind. Kylo's not about to be blown away. We just want enough wind to create just a little bit of a sense of motion with the cape. And in turn, with that sense of motion, add a fair bit of drama to the pose. There's more than one way to make a pose dynamic. There's also more than one way to dehorn a gun dog, but that's a conversation for another time. You're going to notice here that it takes me a great deal of time to get this dialed in any way whatsoever. That's because it's hard. It's hard for me. There may be people out there who can do this quickly. I can even recall watching the experts at Sideshow when they're working with capes. One in particular, Tim, who is basically my sensei when it comes to cape posing, I guess you could say. Sorry, Tim, for calling you out there, but he's pretty solid at it, and he can get it done pretty quickly. But even he just takes his time, studies it, and he has an understanding of what he wants to achieve before he actually goes into it. If he doesn't have an understanding and he's just faking it, then he's faking it really, really well. Anyway, props to Tim. Taught me everything I know. Mostly. Almost all of it. Some I learned on my own. Anyway, I should point out that while I'm taking my time trying to get this thing fixed here, I should point out to y'all that another great resource for studying capes and how to pose capes is comic book art. I'm always going to comic book art for inspiration, for just a means of understanding exactly how something is supposed to work, whether it's capes or draping fabrics, human anatomy, composition, the way that the human body looks in a certain pose. Dynamic poses especially can be best achieved by making it a point to study comic book art. These guys have made it their life's work to understand how these things function, how human bodies function, and what to do to make them look cool, essentially. So if you're looking for inspiration, go to comic book art. If that's not been your thing, make it your thing. If 6-scale figures are going to be your thing, then you should probably branch out a little bit and study that stuff. Anyway, it's just about dialed here. I'm just getting to the point where I kind of like what I've got. You can see that his cape is clearly blowing in the wind. The wind is not terribly strong. Either that or the cloak is really heavy. When am I going to stop calling it a cloak? At any rate, I'm kind of liking what I've got here. Now, just taking a look at this, you can see the way that I've got the cape kind of just draping over his arm. That's natural. That's how that's going to look. That's how that would play in real life. Focus on that. When there's interaction between the arm and a cape, that cape has a certain pattern of behavior that it's going to observe. So keep that in mind when you're playing with that portion of it, and do that on both sides. Just have them wrap around that and fall across it. Maybe even create a drape. Watch those waves down there at the bottom. You don't want them to become too obnoxious. Tighter is better than more billowy, unless of course that's something that you're trying to achieve. But I think the subtlety that I've hit here is actually benefiting the overall look of the figure. And that's just about got it. Yeah. And just it's leaning back a little bit. So right now I'm just kind of trying to straighten that leg and just try to find some balance. Again, those boots are really stiff, and you can kind of work with them a little bit. You can kind of force them to go into a certain angle ever so slightly, but ultimately you're kind of limited there. And it's okay, because you can still achieve quite a bit if you know what you're doing. But really, I don't know, I'm pretty happy with that. What do you all think? Just a quick note on photoshopping. Most of the effects that I use in my photos are practical. The only thing I photoshopped in this image was the lightsaber blade, or in any of the images I think was the lightsaber blade. Might have photoshopped some dust marks or something like that as well. But everything else I try to do with practical effects as much as I can. My choice of effect for Kylo's lightsaber blade, when I see that thing, I keep thinking of flaming swords, Thoros of Mir kind of stuff. So I've just kind of adjusted my means of applying effects, the standard effects to Kylo's lightsaber to make it look more like a flaming sword. Whether or not that's effective or desirable even, that's up to the viewer, I suppose. Kylo Ren as a character is polarizing. I happen to like him. I mean, I don't want to have tea with him or beers or anything like that, but I like what they've done with the character. A lot of people seem to think he's pathetic. Of course he is. He's an evil tyrant. Evil tyrants are pathetic by nature. I mean, sure, he looks cool, but evil, pathetic tyrants are always dressing themselves up to look more menacing. That's what they do. It's part of their appeal, and it's frighteningly effective. Thanks for watching the video, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to leave a comment and tune in next time. Until then, be good to your plastic. Whoa, that was a long one, but you made it. Feel free to hit the subscribe button if you liked it, and that way you'll get notified next time I have something come up. If you're really hardcore, there's that notification bell right next to the subscribe button. I have no idea what it's going to do, but if you click it, you might be able to tell me later. Thanks very much, everybody. Tune in next time. Be good to your plastic.